Today I'll talk about marriage. And when I use the term marriage, I mean it not only to talk about the standard definition of marriage, official marriages, but also any stable, long-term relationship, romantic relationship that people have. What I'll do is I'll tell you about a new procedure that my collaborators and I have developed that can help you sustain high-quality marriage over time. And in the end, if I'm successful, I will have convinced you that spending the 21 minutes a year it takes to follow our procedure is perhaps the single best investment you will ever make in the quality of your life. Before I get there, let's get on the same page about some background information. The first thing I want to talk about is something that we all missed. There is a large change happening in our social milieu, and we largely haven't noticed it. We've been focused on very shiny new things like the advent of online dating and the advent of social networking sites, but we've missed something far more fundamental to the way humans have socialized for a long time. Specifically, we missed the fact that our social networks, defined in terms of who our intimate social connections are, is getting narrower. We have our networks are smaller and smaller over time, and we're increasingly emphasizing the marital bond more than ever before. Let me give you some evidence for this. So this is a study that was published in 2006. It's a study that reports evidence from a large-scale study of Americans that were asked this question in 1985 and in 2004. Specifically, they were asked, looking back over the last 6 months, who are the people with whom you discussed matters important to you? In other words, who are your close, intimate confidants? And we should be paying attention to this next graph because the findings are fairly stark. What we see here is that this is the change from 1985 to 2004. And what we see is the percentage of Americans who list a friend, a sibling, a coworker, a co-member of a group, or a neighbor as a close confidant, who have at least one member of each of those social categories that is an actual confidant, has plummeted on the order of 30 to 60% over the course of 19 years in our very recent history, right? So just to put a little flesh on these bones, the percentage of Americans in 1985 who listed a co-member of a group as a close confidant was 26.1%. By 2004, that number had plummeted to 11.8%. How about neighbors? In 1985, 18.5% of Americans had at least one neighbor who was a close confidant. By 2004, that number had plummeted to 7.9%. Contrast these numbers with what's happening with the spouse. More and more of us are increasingly dependent, increasingly focused on the spousal relationship at the expense of this much broader social milieu we used to have. Most of us have missed this change, and most social commentators have missed the change. There's an interesting exception. Some of you will be familiar with Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She has an excellent quote about what we expect from marriage these days as opposed to what we expected in the past. It's not enough that you have this sort of decent relationship with this person. He also has to be your best friend. He also has to be your only romantic partner. He also has to be somebody who inspires you every day. He has to be somebody who is going to help your career. He has to be somebody who co-parents with you. He has to meet you on 25 different levels of intersection. And I think this is right. Relative to any time in the past, we're depending on the marital bond more and more for these emotional, physical, career-related needs than ever before. And what that means is that the quality of your marriage is more important today than ever before. And what that means is that the marriage hack, this procedure that I'm going to tell you about, it would have been useful 25 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago, but today it is absolutely essential because keeping a high-quality marriage when we're putting so much stock in this one relationship is crucial. But it turns out that having a good quality marriage has been an important thing for a long time. It turns out that if you want to predict people's overall happiness with their life, you can't do any better in trying to predict how well they're doing in their life in general, how happy they are, than figuring out how well their marriage is functioning. And I know you're thinking, well, certainly how satisfied they are with their career matters and how satisfied they are with their friendships and their financial circumstances. All of these things matter, even their health. But the marriage relationship matters about twice as much in terms of predicting how globally happy they are with their lives. And it's not just happiness. It's literally your mental and your physical health that are at stake on the basis of whether you have a high or a low quality marriage. There are dozens of studies that show this now. This is one of my favorites. This is a study by James Coyne et al. It was published in 2001. And what you can see is he recruited 200 congestive heart failure patients and their spouse. and their spouses. And what he did is he was able to categorize some of those marriages as high-quality marriages and some of those marriages at low-quality marriages, and then he looked over time to see who died, which people were more likely to die. And what he finds is if you were coded at baseline as having a high-quality marriage, 2 years later, you had about a 16% likelihood of being dead. If you had a low-quality marriage, in contrast to a high-quality marriage, you had about a 45% likelihood of being dead. Another way of saying that is if you have congestive heart failure, and instead of having a high-quality marriage, you have a low-quality marriage, you are about 3 times more likely to die over the ensuing 2 years. And this is not due to some confounding with disease severity or other type of factor. It looks like the marital relationship is causally related to your physical health. And it's not just this, it's also your mental health, it's also a broad range of other studies on physical health. And I want to alert you that you are going to confront problems in your marriage. There's going to be some difficulties, right? So the good news is if you've got a good functioning marriage, you're happy, you're healthy, etc. The bad news is most of us show this pattern in our marital well-being over time, right? So over here on the left side, you've got newlyweds, and you can see the newlyweds are really quite happy, right? And then over time, what do you see? You see a downward slope, and what you might have thought is, yeah, well, there's a newlywed period. We all knew that. But the newlywed period seems to imply that there's like a brief period, a year or two, where things are really good, and then you settle into a stable pattern. But it doesn't look like that's the way it works. It looks like you just go down over time, at least for the first 50 years that have been studied, right? And I'm not that optimistic that at year 77 of marriage, it starts to bounce back up, right? So you've got this downward trajectory over time. So what's amazing about the fact that we live in the 21st century is we don't have to sit idly by and watch our marriages plummet. We're not passive observers. Ethel, would you look at that? Our marriage, it's deteriorating, right? We don't have to do that because the science has reached a point where we know enough about human social psychology that we can intervene. Here's the problem with the fact that we can intervene. Most people, when they think about intervening in their marriage, think about marital therapy. That's fine, except that most people, when they think about marital therapy, they view it as the final stopgap procedure that you use because you're about to divorce, right? They say, well, gosh, it's been 15 years. I've sort of hated you all this time, and now we're thinking about divorce. Let's go see somebody about that. That is the wrong time. The wrong time to seek marital therapy because you've developed terrible patterns. Terrible interpersonal patterns, and you develop scar tissue created from hurt and anger and frustration, and it's pretty difficult to reverse those tides. I want to suggest that the right time to intervene is earlier, and I want to look to John F. Kennedy here. He had this terrific quote. He was talking about the economy, but it applies here too. The time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. I want to suggest that it is precisely wrong to think about intervening in marriage as something that you do as a last resort, and precisely correct to think about intervening in your marriage as something that you do when it is really flourishing. How can we help sustain the quality of this thing? Now, I want to get to the marriage hack, to this procedure that I alluded to earlier. The term marriage hack is a play on the idea of a life hack. Many of you will be familiar with this term. A life hack is a simple workaround solution that, even though it's relatively straightforward to implement, has profound influence on your productivity, your efficiency, your happiness, and your everyday life. The marriage hack logic is the same thing. A simple procedure, a workaround that helps you solve a major problem in your life. In this particular situation, it's the problem of the fact that most of us will experience declines in marital satisfaction if we don't intervene. So before I get to the funding source, the focus of the marriage hack is on conflict, not about whether or not you have conflict. If you're married, you have conflict. It's self-evident. It's going to happen. That's fine. It's how you navigate conflict. Scholars have shown for a long time now that the single predictor that most reliably distinguishes flourishing from failing marriages is how they go about navigating their conflict. For example, in poorly functioning marriages, we tend to show contempt. When we fight with our partner, we tend to impugn them, ideally in the sexual domain or anything else that we think will really hurt them, right? But we know that the right way to fight is to try to say, I see your perspective, that's an interesting point, I know you've been making an effort to try to improve on that. Why am I telling you this? It's totally self-evident. It's only self-evident to you because you are not currently fighting. When you're fighting, it's hard to implement these things. It's hard to do these procedures that we know are really effective for trying to help us fight constructively. So what this marriage hack is designed to do It is designed to give us the psychological space that we need in order to fight constructively. And once we fight constructively, we see the big picture, we focus on the good things about the relationship too, and that's the goal of what we're trying to achieve. So I got some money, I got a grant from the National Science Foundation. I was lucky enough to recruit a team of all-star social psychologists, Erica Slaughter, Laura Lukes, Greg Walton, James Gross, and the 5 of us worked together to design a study. We brought 120 couples from the Chicago area into our study. And what all of these couples did is every 4 months, over the period of 2 years, they filled out a long battery of questionnaires, and included in this long battery of questionnaires was a section where they wrote about the most recent serious conflict they had experienced in their marriage. That procedure is identical for everybody, except in the second year of the study, we implemented the marriage hack. We randomly assigned half of the couples, 60 couples, to do one additional thing. So everybody's doing these long questionnaires, everybody's writing about conflict, but then this additional set of people takes 7 extra minutes at each of the waves, so this is each of the 3 year 2 waves of the questionnaire. They write for an additional 7 minutes about the conflict. That's all they do. And specifically, they try to adopt a third-party perspective. I want to show you, before I get into the details, what sorts of conflicts people showed. Now, in some sense, I want to show you because I want to give you a sense of what was actually happening in the study. In another sense, it's fun being a social psychologist and getting a sense of what these conflicts are. So here's an example. She thought that I wasn't listening because I asked her to repeat what she was saying several times. It's hard to know how to interpret these if you just get them written onto your, into your website, but c'est la vie. This next one is a similar topic, except it's a woman talking, and she literally is screaming into her computer. She's writing in all caps, and she says, "The fact that I don't let him finish his thoughts, i.e. I don't listen to him." And it seems plausible to me that he probably has a point, right? I mean, she's screaming at me through her keyboard. "My husband thinks I should do more exercise. I'm in perfect shape, and he keeps saying that I need it. I grant you that I am a marital scholar, but men, bad idea. You are going to end up having a conflict if you pursue this route." This one also didn't make total sense. "My husband messed up the bathroom and denied that he did it." I think what happened there is that he did some plumbing and then the water leaked, but I like to think he actually had a galactic gastrointestinal experience and then left and was like, "Oh, what?" Navigating sex, she doesn't want to have it. Surprisingly common conflict, or those of you who are married aren't surprised by this at all, but this is a very frequent conflict. Another one that's quite frequent, people fight about how to raise their children, how to discipline the children, the way we discipline our children, to spank or not to spank. Right? Several generations after Shakespeare, it continues to improve. And actually, this is where I jumped the shark in terms of my editing of my PowerPoint presentation. So what we wanted to do is again, the idea is to give people the space, give people the psychological space to navigate their conflict more constructively. And so what we understood about conflict is when we fight with other people, especially in our marriage, we tend to adopt a myopic perspective. We adopt our own perspective, and from our own perspective, it's extremely easy to see all the things that you're doing that are not only correct, but morally righteous, and all the things your spouse is doing that are totally unacceptable, right? And here's the problem. You think that, your spouse thinks the same thing, and you end up having the sorts of conflict that is destructive rather than constructive. So we wanted to get people out of this. And so what we did in this extra 7 minutes of writing that they did 3 times in the marriage hack condition is we had them write about 3 different things. The first thing we had them do, they had just written about the most significant conflict they had experienced over the previous 4 months. We had them write a little bit more about that. We had them say, try to think about the conflict from the perspective of a neutral third party who wants the best for everybody, right? The idea is start to get out of your own viewpoint on this issue. But again, the goal wasn't to have them just reinterpret their old conflicts. The goal was to have them adopt this perspective going forward. And so for the second of the 3 writing prompts, we said, what obstacles will you confront when trying to adopt this perspective? So people in this condition not only had to say how a third party, an objective third party who wants the best for all involved, would have interpreted the past conflict, but also as I go forward, if I want to apply this general way of thinking to my conflicts, why might that be difficult? right? And we didn't want to leave it there, so we had a third prompt, which is, how can you surmount these obstacles? These obstacles that you just mentioned, how can you get past them in a way that will help you adopt this neutral, benevolent, third-party perspective? Well, what did we find? This is relationship quality is plotted here, and this is time. This is over the course of the 2 years of the study. In the no intervention condition, we find what everybody finds. Marital satisfaction, if the marriage is left to its own devices, marital quality will decline. Now, what happens in the marriage hack? You'll recall, it was only in the second year that we randomly assigned people to experience the marriage hack, and this is what the pattern looked like for these folks. That is a significant deviation. Those slopes are significantly different, and actually, if you run the statistics, that line over here is statistically flat. What does that mean? It means that all of those studies and our study that show that marital quality, marital satisfaction tend to decline linearly over time, tend to decline substantially over time, that we can eliminate that effect with this 21-minute writing exercise, this 3 different 7-minute writing exercises over the course of the year. Now, one thing I should say, the relationship quality measure had a bunch of submeasures and they all showed the same pattern: satisfaction, love, trust, intimacy, and my personal favorite, sexual passion. Writing about how a third party would think about your conflicts in your marriage helps you sustain sexual passion for your marriage, which is like the holy grail of marital interventions. And frankly, a marital therapist or anybody who's ever been married will tell you this is not the easiest thing to do. Also, it's not just a marriage hack, it's a life hack. People who were in this condition, did this extra 21 minutes of writing relative to the people who didn't, were also less depressed, less stressed, and globally happier with their lives at the end of the study. How did this happen? What the marriage hack procedure forced people to do is to get out of this myopic, self-focused perspective. They were able to be less angry during their fights. The conflicts were just as severe, they were just as frequent, people were less angry about them. And because of that, because they weren't looking through their own eyes at things all the time, they weren't focused so harshly on this conflict. They could see, wait a minute, this is 2 people. We have a pretty good relationship, and this conflict isn't the be-all, end-all. One last question. When is the best time in your marriage to implement this procedure? Is it when you're newlyweds, when you've been married 5 years or 15 years or 30 years? Well, let me remind you about 2 graphs that I showed you earlier. This is the overall trajectory of marital satisfaction. This is the effect of our intervention. What can we do? The best we've done thus far is stem the tide. We've eliminated the downward slope, the downward trajectory in marital decline, the downward trajectory in marital satisfaction, marital quality, but we haven't reversed it. So when I ask you, when is the right time? The answer is now. No matter how long you've been married, don't sit there and wait until 3 years later, because then you're going to be at that baseline when you start the intervention. All of this happens over the course of 21 minutes a year. And this is what I hope to convince you, is that this is a tremendous investment, that it's hard to imagine that you could spend those 21 minutes doing anything more effective. And in fact, in the time that you spent listening to me talk, you could have saved your marriage. Get to work. Okay.